The design keynote at Aries 2020 Virtual Edition will be delivered by 8 Incorporated founder and Chief Executive Officer Tim Kobe, the designer of the original Apple Store, who also presented at last year's summit. Tim will talk about sustainability as the baseline of design.
Hi, I'm Tim Kobe, founder and Chief Executive Officer of 8 Inc. We design for some of the best and most loved companies in the world. Companies such as Apple, Virgin, Tesla, as well as the leading real estate developers across Asia. I'm very happy to return to PropertyGuru Asia Real Estate Summit and join the first ever virtual edition December 3rd. This year, I will be presenting the design keynote, and I'll discuss how sustainability and value creation are baseline for successful development and design. Welcome to the spirit of innovation and design in the new economy. Our company, 8 Inc., was founded in San Francisco and is founded on the belief that design can define human progress. And ultimately, much of the success that we've seen over the years has been rooted in a design-centered approach. One of the first questions we're often asked is, how do you define innovation in design? And the answer is really, what does it do for people? Good design, as I said, defines human progress, but design is also about change. And design can either be progressive, regressive, and you're either creating value, extracting value, or destroying it. So what we need to focus on is maybe looking at things through a slightly different lens, to focus on human outcomes, to better design the types of changes that we need to make our lives healthier, happier, and more successful. Ultimately, the key points today have nothing to do with urban objects and everything to do with urban living. Where we start is with the value creation engine. We look at the human outcomes first and foremost, and then from that, develop strategies that deliver on those outcomes. And ultimately, then the tactics that support the vision, that deliver the outcomes. And we've seen this time and time again, both recently as well as in history. I'm sure everyone in 2007, when Apple introduced the first iPhone, that it would have on our lives, nor the transformation. But if you think about it today, who is the solution? What people are really looking for are not incremental technological progress, but ultimately, what are we doing to help make people's lives better and to change their lives in a significant way? Many of you may remember one of the early iPods, and the iPod introduction, a perfect example of how we should maybe reframe this question as to what we focus on and what we develop.
And this is what the front looks like. Boom. That's iPod. I happen to have one right here in my pocket, matter of fact. There it is, right there. So, this amazing little device holds 1,000 songs, and it goes right in my pocket.
So what Steve was talking about here was really the human outcome. What made his technology really technology and not just a technical accomplishment? And the real solution here is that it actually allowed people to have a greater connection to their music and to improve their lives in a way that allowed them to carry 1,000 songs in their pocket. And this is the basis that we look at when we think of the human outcome first, and then developing the strategy and ultimately the tactics. One of the next questions to think about here is the idea of sustainability. And I think the question is more than just sustainable, but what is survivability? We're looking at sustainability from the standpoint of resilience and being able to continue to evolve and grow during this time of exponential change. We live in an area that's changing faster than most people are comfortable to deal with, and the rate of change is increasing faster than our ability to adapt to that change. But we also live in an area of incredible opportunity. Exponential change is outpacing our ability to respond. And so what it means is we have to look farther down the line, and we have to look at risk differently than maybe we did in the past. When things changed slowly in the past, risk was making change. Today, because things are changing so quickly, keeping the status quo is maybe one of the riskiest moves you can do. And so a project that we looked at here for Temasek in Singapore is about defining a new economy for Singapore within an experience and a space and an architecture that stimulates the creative economy. And if you look at this from the standpoint of aiming farther, you're finding an opportunity to leverage what a creative economy means and to learn from what has been done historically in the past. And as a catalyst, this idea of creating a place that has an opportunity for people to create the next new thing has become kind of the center focus for this project. And in looking at that, we evaluated case studies in many different locations, from Dubai to Songdo in Korea, Barcelona in Spain, and Boston, and ultimately looked at providing a framework for creative economies to thrive within. And this, which I'll talk about a bit later, goes back to creating a sustainable ecosystem. One of the most interesting results that came from this, at least in the near term, was to see Singapore overtake the US as one of the most competitive economies. So starting to create this framework for a future condition can have enormous impact, both in terms of creating value, not just for a company, but for a country or for a region. Another question I'm often asked is, what can designers and architects do to commit to sustainability? And of course, the answer is having the courage to do that. We know that 60% of carbon emissions come from building creation and operations. It means we have a huge impact in whether or not our actions have positive or negative impact on our environment. And economic models keep shifting, but we clearly see the negative impact of exploitation of our natural resources and our common shared wealth. So sustainability needs a champion. Architects and designers have to play a role, and so do developers. In San Francisco, for example, the government decided that developments who meet sustainability standards would receive preferential placement in a queue for project approvals. It cost San Francisco virtually nothing, and it gave those doing responsible development a preferred position and therefore a competitive advantage over those who were not. But as I said, the purpose of design is to contribute to finding better ways to accomplish things, better ways for people to live safer, happier, and more meaningful lives. When we looked at the original Apple stores we designed, working with Steve for many years, it wasn't obvious to begin with that what we were doing, would have the success that we had hoped it would have, but also that everything that we were putting into the thinking behind it would ultimately generate value. Now, we know that Apple ultimately grew from a $2.5 billion company to now the first $2 trillion company. But what most people don't realize is that we spent time thinking about the systems that go together to put together a store. And in doing that, not just the construction of it, but the entire operational life cycle, as well as when you need to change or replace a store. And this was about being responsible to a sustainability practice long before it was popular. And it was up to us to really define a design that could be taken apart when it was finished or if it ever needed to change, and to be able to be recycled if necessary, but to break down into those component parts. And again, it's the idea of taking on that responsibility, and as architects and designers and developers and companies, to make that something that's foundational to the types of things that you're creating. So when we think about design, we often look at human experience. What are the experiences that people are creating, and how do you stand out in an environment that um, is transforming in very fast ways? And our answer is often beware of best practice. Operationally, best practices make a lot of sense. If you're looking at a competitive environment, they make little sense. Asia has many advantages, and COVID, while it has enormous short-term impact, is just part of the challenges that we may see in the future. And we think that experience and how to distinguish the offer and elevate emotional connections are really the key to connecting people to companies and to your products. And so designing better human outcomes is the key. We know from the research that many people spend a lot of time creating what they believe is a differentiated product, but delivering it in the same way as their peers. And so ultimately, consumers don't recognize the value and they don't recognize the difference. And if you're emulating or copying, you're creating parity in the industry that you have, and you're ultimately commoditizing the value that you create. And so one of the ways to do that is to think about what is the experience that people have with your company? How do you connect with them, and how do you differentiate yourself? We do something called an experience master plan, which is consistent with an architectural master plan in the sense that it defines how the people interact and how they connect when they engage in your development or in your architecture or with your product. And in the experience master plan, what we look at is the value creation opportunity between the people who are at the center of the decision making, and ultimately then the values that they have and that the companies reflect. And so for us, it's essential that these pieces be connected, that you move from a transaction to a relationship type of posture. And then we look at the different ways that the human outcomes are generated. And these are typically the touch points, whether it's the products and services, the places, or the communications. Each one of these represent a holistic type of view for defining an experience. And it allows customers to understand the value you stand for, regardless of the touch point. One shift that we see is looking at moving from product to experience in a way that can help define a new position in a much more meaningful way for companies, in this case, countries like Dubai. This is creating a large experience that is one of the tallest base jumping structures in the world. But the idea of establishing something that is distinctive, that differentiates itself from others, as well as starts to position the country in a way that it stands for activity, engagement, and physical sports. And so this is something that while it's specific to a particular nation and a particular purpose, what it is doing is looking at that differentiated opportunity as well as heightening those emotional connections. And what we know is that actually creates value. And so in addition to many different aspects of both physical and digital touch points, what we know with great experience is that you're going to create incredible lift in terms of defining a positive emotional experience. You're going to increase advocacy. You're going to have 12 times advocacy of advocates of your consumers, and 5 times more likely for them to forgive mistakes when you create them. And so the next question is, how can we harness the power of strategic design? And this goes back to really focusing on creating value. One of the key things that we look at for this is that better human outcomes are not only good for cities and our planet, but they're ultimately good business. And good business means that we're defining ways and solutions that help people feel optimistic rather than pessimistic, and have the opportunity to increase value through the engagement that they have with your business. We've seen value come in the forms of transactions, in terms of foot traffic, engagement, and many other examples. where this value can be heightened and the relationship that you're creating becomes stronger. In the automotive sector, this was looking at moving foot traffic for Nissan and their experience center in Ginza from 30,000 to 40,000. By changing the approach, we ended up with 250,000 visitors. In the airline sector, redefining what a lounge was so that Virgin offered a clubhouse experience, something consistent with their brand, and was consistently rated in the top 5 in the world for the past 10 years. In the telco sector, moving from selling the pipes, the services that telcos commonly offer, to becoming an entertainment company, to delivering on the emotion, the reason people buy those pipes. And this is moving Globe Telecom from 23% market share to 56% market share. And then ultimately, as I mentioned with Apple, from 2 billion to 2 trillion. But one of the keys that we see in this is this idea that comes from Scott Galloway, the new algorithm of value. And what it represents is that the companies who are the most valuable in the world, in this case, upper right-hand corner represents about 51% of the NASDAQ stock exchange value, are successful because of the receptors that they have in the market and the intelligence that they garner from that. And what that means is it's not just a question of tracking and monitoring, but it's a question of changing the relationship from a broadcast one to one that is about moving into a dialogue. So rather than a monologue approach to a relationship, it's starting to look at this engagement that allows for discussion, activity, and information in terms of the values that people are connecting to that you offer. Another question is, what are the design trends and concepts that we see in a post-COVID world? I think one of the key things here is ecosystem thinking. The idea that we used to solve things in smaller tactical ways, and we start to have to look at things in connected ways. Almost everything in nature is a connected ecosystem. And today we need to continuously and rapidly change and create something that Thomas Friedman calls dynamic stability, where we will be in a state of perpetual change as speed is continually increasing. And in a way, we've been operating in an outdated operating system. It's been fragmented, linear, and task-oriented. And what we need to think about today is moving into a new type of operating system, one with multiple forms of input and expression, multiple forms of connectivity, and looking at disparate applications. So what we need is really this operating system that reflects the ability to be stable within a dynamic environment. So with all of these questions, what it comes down to is something that Hal Gergensen at MIT calls questions are the answers. And for us, this is something that's essential in creating experience and successful outcomes for business and for the customers. And so what we've done is we've codified the experience factors that we believe have the strongest input. What are the experience elements that we can focus on? And then what are the questions that we ask of the consumer? And what are the questions we ask of the company providing the goods and services for the consumer? And I think by framing it in this way, we have an opportunity of being successful in defining the core elements of that experience. Being able to talk about what it does for people, the idea that it's not just about what something looks or feels like, but what is the impact that it has on people's lives? How does it influence engagement? What are the types of things that drive behavior? And how is the experience meaningful? And I think there's an opportunity here to evolve. We often suffer from limited thinking, almost an industrial era way of transferring what we used to have as lines and cubicles into our workspaces. But today we have a new way of engaging. We tend to work in completely different ways we couldn't imagine a year ago. And so when we think of cities as a function of isolated architecture and individual objects, we have to start to shift our way of thinking. And this means, as an ecosystem, moving to creating a platform for living and being part of that platform. And so for us, the secret to value creation is better human experience. Thank you.